Alex Batty was abducted at the age of 11 during a holiday in Spain after his grandmother and legal guardian, Susan Cowan, allowed her daughter Melanie to take him on what was presented as a one-week trip. Susan later recognized that this agreement had been a mistake, but at the time it appeared to be a routine family arrangement built on reluctant trust and hopeful assumption. As the trip progressed, communication became strained and unpredictable. Susan attempted to maintain contact, expecting normal updates and confirmation of Alex's return date. During a final phone call, she clearly instructed him that he would be coming home as scheduled. In response, Melanie's voice was heard directing Alex to end the conversation and to put the phone down immediately, followed by the severing of all communication channels. That moment became the definitive turning point. Susan understood with sudden clarity that Alex would not be returning and that what had been framed as a temporary holiday had transformed into an unauthorized removal. The sudden absence of contact created immediate fear and uncertainty, leaving her without any reliable information regarding Alex's location, safety, or well-being. Melanie had no intention of coming back, and her actions shifted the situation from ordinary travel into a kidnapping situation with legal and emotional consequences. Susan was plunged into shock, struggling to comprehend how quickly her access to her grandson had been eliminated. The abrupt silence offered no reassurance or explanation, only unanswered questions and silence. From that point forward, the reality of Alex's disappearance became unavoidable. Susan was left uncertain whether he was safe, hidden, or in danger, unable to trace his whereabouts or confirm his condition. The loss of contact removed stability from daily life and introduced a permanent sense of distress and apprehension. This moment established the foundation for a prolonged missing persons investigation marked by confusion and emotional strain. What began as trusted family consent evolved into a situation defined by absence and uncertainty. Susan's realization that her grandson had been taken without permission created a lasting impact, shaping every subsequent effort to recover him. The situation left the family in a state of ongoing alarm, with no clear understanding of what life Alex was being forced to live. Each unanswered attempt to reconnect reinforced the painful knowledge that he had been abruptly removed from familiar care and ordinary structure. This initial event defined the trajectory of the case and introduced a prolonged period of unresolved separation. Every detail of the moment remained fixed in Susan's memory, from the final sound of her grandson's voice to the cold certainty that followed. She understood that she had lost immediate control and entered a reality defined by waiting and uncertainty. The transition from hopeful expectation to devastating awareness occurred without warning, leaving her suspended in fear and disbelief. This single decision to trust Melanie on the trip reshaped her life and began the painful process of searching without answers. Confusion deepened as days passed without confirmation or reassurance. Melanie Batty's mindset prior to the abduction was shaped by deep immersion in anti-government conspiracies, spiritual ideologies, and alternative lifestyle beliefs that Susan described as detached from reality. Her worldview rejected conventional authority and promoted the idea that existing systems operated through control rather than care, influencing every decision she made regarding her role as a parent. Melanie became increasingly absorbed in rejecting statutory law, participating in protests, and expressing strong opposition toward governmental structures. These actions were not isolated events but reflected a consistent pattern of behavior that signaled emotional and psychological instability. Susan observed these developments with growing concern, recognizing that Melanie's thinking was becoming more rigid and disconnected from practical responsibility. As Melanie's beliefs intensified, her approach to parenting shifted dramatically. She argued that her perspective allowed her to provide Alex with a superior life, free from what she considered manipulation and restriction. This conviction reinforced her belief that separating him from conventional guardianship was necessary for his well-being. In her mind, removing him was interpreted not as harm, but as protection. Susan's awareness of this ideological obsession ultimately resulted in her being granted legal custody of Alex in 2016. The decision reflected recognition that Melanie's influence posed a risk to stable upbringing. Her actions were increasingly erratic, unpredictable, and guided by concepts disconnected from rational parenting standards. Melanie's behavior consistently demonstrated her refusal to accept traditional authority or structured responsibility. Her rejection of common law principles and promotion of personal sovereignty illustrated a mindset driven by alternative reality perception. These patterns revealed not only unpredictability, but an inability to prioritize her child's stability over ideological devotion. Her belief system constructed a narrative where she viewed herself as enlightened and others as misguided. Within this constructed reality, Alex became central to her mission, a symbol of personal liberation rather than a child requiring care and consistency. Her conviction justified every decision made under its influence. This environment created conditions where ordinary boundaries ceased to exist. Susan's decision to remove custody was grounded in concern for Alex's safety and emotional development, recognizing that Melanie's behavior no longer aligned with responsible guardianship. The progression of these beliefs established the psychological foundation for the events that followed. By examining Melanie's worldview, the underlying motivation behind her actions becomes clearer. Her instability did not emerge suddenly, but evolved through sustained ideological immersion and defiance of accepted norms. These patterns demonstrate how personal belief can override duty and lead to irreversible consequence. Through her repeated rejection of established structure, Melanie positioned herself outside ordinary parental frameworks, reinforcing a cycle of isolation and impulsive decision-making. Her interpretation of reality created distance from those attempting to intervene constructively. Susan's observations reflected concern grounded in lived experience rather than assumption. Every sign pointed toward an individual increasingly governed by ideology instead of accountability. This progression clarified the rationale behind legal intervention and underscored how Melanie's internal narrative directly informed the sequence of actions that ultimately shaped the disappearance of her son entirely tragically. Alex lived for 6 years in deliberate concealment, moving through hippie communes and remote locations across Spain before later relocating into rural areas of France. This hidden existence was defined by constant motion, limited stability, and an ongoing effort to remain unseen by authorities. To protect his identity and avoid recognition, Alex adopted a false name, referring to himself as Zach whenever contact with unfamiliar individuals became unavoidable. Life during this period followed a nomadic pattern shaped by isolation and uncertainty. Temporary shelters replaced permanent homes, and every move was guided by the need to remain unnoticed. Survival strategies were implemented consistently, including cautious interaction with strangers, avoidance of official documentation, and controlled exposure in public spaces. He remained aware that any misstep could risk discovery, reinforcing a continual state of vigilance. Education during these years was absent from formal structures. Alex did not attend school and was instead required to teach himself independently. Learning was sporadic and self-directed, dependent on available resources and personal motivation. Without guidance or structured curriculum, his academic development relied entirely on self-instruction and observation. The absence of routine contributed to a fragmented sense of normality. Daily life revolved around adapting to unpredictable environments and accepting responsibility beyond his age. Ordinary childhood experiences were replaced by movement and survival, distancing him further from peers and traditional upbringing. Over time, the constant use of an assumed identity became integrated into his sense of self. Zach became a role he occupied continuously, reinforcing separation from his true identity. This transformation served as both protection and burden, restricting emotional expression while ensuring concealment. Living conditions remained unconventional and uncertain. Communal living required adjustment to unfamiliar norms, while remote isolation demanded resilience and endurance. Without stability, each day was dictated by immediate necessity rather than long-term planning or security. Through years of displacement, Alex learned to navigate a world shaped by secrecy. His hidden existence was not one of freedom, but of quiet endurance, where personal identity was suppressed in exchange for protection. This sustained concealment defined his formative years, illustrating the profound impact of prolonged isolation and enforced anonymity on a developing life. He maintained constant awareness of surroundings, measuring conversations and choosing silence when exposure felt possible. Every interaction required careful thought, as trust was limited and discretion essential. Distance from familiar education and social guidance placed him in a position of premature responsibility, where adaptation replaced exploration. Over time, self-reliance became necessary for emotional survival, reinforcing restraint and internalization. Temporary routines formed only to dissolve again, mirroring the impermanence defining his environment. His reliance on observation over instruction reshaped learning into instinct rather than structured growth. The uncertainty of location became normal, while movement became expectation. Each relocation reaffirmed the need for anonymity and reinforced the continuation of concealment. Through repetition and adjustment, his awareness evolved, yet the absence of stability remained constant. This prolonged hidden lifestyle demonstrated how even basic structures disappear when survival requires invisibility and compliance with imposed isolation. Alex's emotional coping during his years in hiding was defined by loneliness, isolation, and silent endurance shaped by continuous uncertainty. Without friendships or stable social contact, he navigated daily life detached from peers and ordinary interaction. The absence of companionship created an emotional void that gradually conditioned him to withdraw rather than express vulnerability. He rarely interacted with people his own age, reinforcing a persistent sense of separation from normal development. Social connection, which typically anchors emotional stability, was replaced by solitude and routine responsibility. This isolation forced Alex to mature prematurely, prioritizing survival and compliance instead of emotional growth and exploration. Around the age of 13, Alex briefly expressed sadness to his mother, acknowledging the weight of his loneliness and the emotional strain he carried. This moment of vulnerability marked one of the few times he attempted to articulate his internal experience. Following that expression, he ceased discussing his emotions altogether, choosing silence rather than continued confrontation of his reality. By suppressing his feelings, Alex adopted emotional restraint as a protective mechanism. Voicing distress no longer felt safe or productive, leading to internalization and withdrawal. Over time, this suppression became habitual, reinforcing a pattern of emotional avoidance rooted in necessity rather than choice. The psychological impact of prolonged isolation intensified as he carried increasing responsibility beyond his age. He assumed roles and obligations not suited for a developing adolescent, creating internal pressure that lacked appropriate support or reassurance. Each day demanded composure, reinforcing a cycle where emotional needs remained unaddressed. Despite the urge for companionship, Alex learned to endure loneliness through adaptation rather than connection. His silence became a quiet form of resilience, though it simultaneously limited emotional relief and expression. The absence of empathy and recognition further deepened the psychological strain. His internal conflict existed between the desire to feel understood and the habit of isolation he had cultivated. Over years, the suppression of vulnerability reshaped his emotional landscape, reducing trust and expression. The result was a subdued emotional presence shaped by necessity and unresolved solitude. This prolonged strain illustrated the impact of forced isolation on developing mental health. Without access to supportive communication or validation, Alex carried emotional burdens silently. The absence of release prolonged stress, reinforcing emotional detachment. His coping strategy reflected survival rather than healing and underscored the damaging effects of sustained loneliness during critical developmental years. Within this constrained emotional framework, everyday silence replaced open dialogue, tightening the boundaries of his internal world. He learned to present neutrality even when emotion stirred beneath. Fear of further instability discouraged honesty and reinforced distance from authentic communication. The isolation limited emotional vocabulary and dulled expressive capacity over time. Each unattended feeling accumulated quietly, shaping an internal environment defined by compression and restraint. Without reassurance, emotional expression felt unnecessary and unsafe. His mind adjusted to survival conditions, prioritizing function over emotional clarity. This experience demonstrated how silence can become structure, and isolation can redefine emotional identity when prolonged absence of connection becomes the normal state completely permanently. Alex's growing realization that he wanted a normal life emerged gradually, shaped by years of restriction and quiet dissatisfaction. He began to question the existence he had been forced to accept, measuring his daily reality against the idea of ordinary freedom and personal choice. The internal struggle intensified as he balanced a sense of responsibility toward his mother with an increasing recognition that his future required independence and stability. He understood that leaving would place emotional and practical strain upon the only family he had known during those years. Yet the belief that he deserved a life defined by autonomy continued strengthening. This conflict created a persistent tension between loyalty and self-preservation, leaving him emotionally divided but steadily more determined. The turning point arrived following a heated argument, a moment that clarified his inability to continue under the same control. That confrontation transformed reflection into resolve. For the first time, Alex chose action over submission, accepting that remaining silent meant surrendering his own identity completely. With careful intent, he began preparing for departure. He packed a rucksack containing essential belongings, considering what might sustain him beyond the immediate moment. Each item selected represented both utility and quiet defiance, reinforcing the seriousness of his decision. He then wrote a letter directed toward his mother, expressing forgiveness rather than anger. The message conveyed reassurance and emotional restraint, illustrating his effort to separate without hostility. He acknowledged her influence while maintaining his need to leave. The letter served as closure, offering understanding rather than blame, reflecting maturity forced upon him through years of endurance. This preparation stage illustrated the psychological significance of his choice. He was not simply escaping a physical location, but asserting control over his own direction. The act of leaving represented defiance against prolonged compliance and the rejection of a life that denied his individuality. Each step of planning strengthened his resolve. The act of organizing departure affirmed his determination to change his circumstances. For Alex, this moment became a declaration that he was no longer willing to sacrifice personal development to preserve enforced loyalty. His decision embodied a shift from passive endurance to active agency. In choosing to leave, he redefined his identity no longer as a figure dictated by others, but as an individual capable of reclaiming purpose and structure. This transformation represented more than physical movement. It symbolized the beginning of mental and emotional independence, reflecting the courage required to challenge long-standing control. Through this decisive act, Alex initiated a process of reclaiming personal freedom and rebuilding autonomy after years shaped by external command and compliance. This period marked the first moment where intention replaced fear and clarity replaced hesitation within his internal decision-making. Every controlled movement affirmed that this choice belonged to him alone. The escape became a statement of self-preservation, signaling the beginning of autonomy, dignity, and personal redefine, reinforcing that his future would no longer be dictated by imposed dominance or emotional manipulation ever again, entirely ensuring permanent control over identity. Alex began his escape by walking alone through freezing countryside conditions in France, driven by a clear determination to return to England despite overwhelming uncertainty. The landscape was unfamiliar and isolating, and every step forward represented separation from the only structure he had known for years. The physical strain was immediate and relentless. His body battled cold air, stiff muscles, and prolonged fatigue as he continued moving with limited rest. Each mile required concentration and effort, while the environment around him offered little comfort or protection. Mental exhaustion developed alongside physical weakness. Alex carried not only the weight of his belongings, but the emotional pressure of his decision. Doubt surfaced intermittently, yet the belief that this journey was necessary sustained his progress through discomfort and fear. The path ahead remained undefined. He walked without certainty, guided only by the resolve to reclaim his life and restore personal direction. Despite unfamiliar terrain and unpredictable conditions, he refused to turn back, reinforcing his commitment with every measured step. The danger associated with this journey was evident. Exposure to harsh conditions, lack of immediate support, and the possibility of interception intensified the risk. Yet his determination outweighed fear, demonstrating emotional resilience and composure beyond his years. His mind oscillated between exhaustion and clarity, acknowledging the enormity of his choice. Still, the prospect of normality remained a powerful motivator, compelling him forward. Time lost meaning as he focused solely on progression. Each movement reinforced the purpose behind his departure, transforming fatigue into endurance and uncertainty into resolve. This escape represented more than travel. It symbolized a decisive break from imposed confinement and emotional restraint. Through physical perseverance and psychological strength, Alex asserted autonomy and agency. The journey illustrated the vulnerability of his position, revealing the immense challenge he faced without reassurance or protection. His survival depended on willpower and discipline, forged through necessity. Despite his weakening body, he continued walking, sustained by the belief that reaching England meant reclaiming control over his identity. His steps echoed defiance and courage, underscoring the seriousness of his decision. The freezing terrain tested his limits, yet his determination remained intact. Each breath of cold air served as confirmation that he was moving toward freedom. In this fragile moment, endurance became his only safeguard. He pushed forward cautiously, aware that every step carried both risk and possibility. This journey through desolate countryside became a defining chapter, demonstrating his strength and resolve. Through exposure and hardship, Alex transformed his silence into action and reclaimed authority over his path. The absence of guidance heightened every sensation and forced him to rely solely on instinct and internal discipline. He remained conscious of surrounding silence and the vulnerability of his position throughout the relentless journey. Each pause increased awareness of risk, yet each step reaffirmed commitment and perseverance. Through isolation and determination, Alex demonstrated extraordinary emotional strength. His decision to continue forward without certainty reflected resilience developed through adversity and reinforced the narrative of personal reclamation and survival under extreme conditions entirely steadfastly. Alex was discovered by a delivery driver who noticed him walking alone at 3 a.m. along a quiet roadway in rural France. The unusual sight immediately created concern, as no one expected to see a teenager moving through such conditions during that hour. The driver slowed his vehicle and watched cautiously, unsure whether what he observed was ordinary or required immediate attention. Alex, exhausted and visibly worn, attempted to explain his presence in controlled terms, stating simply that he had been kidnapped and was trying to return home. The statement caused hesitation and disbelief, yet it carried a sincerity that prevented immediate dismissal. The driver questioned him further, seeking clarity while maintaining appropriate distance and composure. Alex repeated his account, emphasizing that he had lived in hiding and was no longer able to continue under those circumstances. Recognizing the seriousness of the situation, the driver decided to contact authorities rather than attempt independent intervention. This choice transformed the moment from personal encounter into formal response. Communication with officials was immediate, and the delivery driver remained present to ensure Alex's safety until assistance arrived. This interaction marked the definitive collapse of 6 years of concealment. The hidden existence that had sustained his isolation unraveled in that single exchange. His admission of kidnapping shifted the situation from anonymity to active investigation. The driver's vigilance shifted the trajectory of the case and ended years of enforced silence. Alex remained calm but apprehensive, aware that his revelation would change everything that had defined his recent life. The calm exchange was underpinned by an awareness that secrecy could no longer be maintained. His willingness to speak openly reflected resolve rather than confusion. The driver recognized that reporting the situation carried responsibility and potential consequence. In that moment, trust replaced doubt. The call to authorities symbolized transition from shadow to visibility and marked the end of prolonged avoidance. This discovery did not occur through chance alone, but through attentive observation and measured response. Alex's decision to trust the driver demonstrated a final release from constant fear. The encounter redefined his reality and exposed the truth of his prolonged captivity. Years of concealment unraveled in that single conversation. His voice, once guarded, now signaled readiness to return to normalcy. Responsibility shifted from isolation to accountability through official recognition. The collapse of anonymity represented the first genuine step toward restoration. For Alex, the presence of another adult signaled safety and opportunity. The silence he endured ended with acknowledgement and action. The discovery reaffirmed the power of awareness and decisive action. Through this moment, uncertainty gave way to certainty and exposure. The driver's awareness dismantled years of hidden existence and restored visibility and direction for Alex, reinforcing the importance of vigilance and decisive judgment in moments of critical consequence. His past silence dissolved into truthful explanation, allowing the situation to progress toward formal protection and oversight through appropriate authorities and security channels. This moment concluded isolation and initiated organized recovery and structured intervention without delay. Thereafter, police initiated verification procedures immediately after Alex's encounter with the delivery driver, ensuring his identity was confirmed through careful questioning and official assessment. Officers spoke with him calmly, establishing his name, background, and the circumstances surrounding his disappearance before proceeding with formal confirmation. Once consistency was established, authorities recognized that Alex had indeed been missing for years and that his concealment had now ended. Following this confirmation, arrangements were made to notify his family. Susan received the phone call that carried the message she had long hoped for, yet never fully believed would arrive. The officer informed her that Alex had been found and was safe. For a moment, disbelief overtook comprehension as she attempted to process the words that restored a reality previously lost. Years of uncertainty collapsed into a single moment of overwhelming relief. Emotions shifted between shock and reassurance as the significance of the update settled. The absence that had defined daily life was suddenly replaced with certainty, marking the end of limbo and the beginning of closure. Susan's response reflected both gratitude and emotional exhaustion. The call represented confirmation that the long search was no longer unanswered. While relief surfaced, it was accompanied by the realization that the experience had permanently altered their lives. Family members received the news with similar emotional complexity. Tears, silence, and quiet acknowledgement followed as each individual absorbed the reality of Alex's return. The weight of absence that had shaped years now gave way to cautious hope and renewed connection. This moment did not erase the pain of the past but provided resolution where none had existed. The certainty that Alex was alive and accounted for restored dignity to the narrative that had remained unresolved for so long. The call symbolized closure for a family that had lived under the shadow of uncertainty. What had once been defined by fear and unanswered questions transformed into a reality of confirmed presence and tangible reassurance. Police continued to manage the process with professionalism, ensuring clarity and stability as the family adjusted to the confirmation. The emotional impact of the update marked a turning point that shifted the case from absence to recovery. Through verification and communication, the case evolved from prolonged uncertainty into emotional resolution. For Susan and her family, the phone call redefined their understanding of loss and recovery. The moment captured relief entwined with disbelief, signifying the end of waiting and the beginning of healing. This confirmation reaffirmed the significance of persistent investigation and reinforced the emotional importance of truth in unresolved disappearances. The call restored connection, transformed despair into certainty, and closed a chapter defined by absence, replacing it with renewed presence and restored familial certainty. Although relief arrived, it existed beside lingering disbelief, reflecting the depth of years lived without answers. That single confirmation brought structure where chaos had ruled and stability where silence had dominated. The moment reinforced that even prolonged uncertainty can resolve, allowing emotional release, renewed reassurance, and cautious acceptance of a restored reality ahead together. Alex's return home introduced significant struggle as he attempted to adjust to an environment that no longer felt familiar or predictable. The world he entered appeared faster, louder, and structured by routines he no longer understood. Daily expectations required adaptation, and even simple interactions highlighted the cultural distance created during his absence. His physical growth also underscored the years lost, as he recognized how much time had passed between childhood departure and adolescent return. He observed his surroundings with hesitation, aware that reintegration demanded emotional and psychological recalibration. Technology, social behavior, and ordinary customs felt foreign, intensifying a sense of displacement. The contrast between his sheltered existence and modern life created persistent culture shock and required deliberate effort to navigate. Alex confronted the reality that the teenage years he had missed could not be recovered. Reflection became inevitable as he considered the milestones, friendships, and experiences that had passed without him. Each realization carried weight, reinforcing that he could not simply return to the moment before his disappearance. Emotionally, he navigated fragile boundaries between relief and grief. Gratitude for safety coexisted with quiet mourning for the years stolen by circumstance. This duality shaped his daily experience, reminding him that recovery would not follow a linear path. Reintegration challenged assumptions that return meant resolution. Alex required time to process memory, establish trust, and rediscover identity beyond survival. The process involved patience, structure, and careful support as he learned to exist outside isolation. His family recognized that healing required time and consistency. Subtle gestures of encouragement became essential, allowing Alex to reclaim confidence gradually. Every day introduced minor progress and new understanding, reinforcing that adjustment was complex and deeply personal. This period underscored that safe return does not erase trauma. Reintegration is defined by layered emotion, personal reflection, and evolving adaptation. Alex's journey illustrated that strength lies not in sudden recovery, but in continued effort toward stability and emotional restoration. He moved forward cautiously, accepting that growth demanded patience and sincerity. The path to belonging remained ongoing, marked by awareness of the life he had missed and hope for the future he could still shape. His reintegration demanded patience from those around him while he rebuilt familiarity with daily realities. Ordinary routines required repetition before becoming comfortable and coherent once more. He confronted moments of confusion whenever old habits resurfaced beside unfamiliar modern expectations. Observation and steady guidance supported his gradual movement toward confidence and consistency. Though physically older, he remained emotionally reflective about unexplored aspects of adolescence. His understanding developed through attention, structure, and reassured continuity. Each recollection of missed opportunity generated both quiet sorrow and cautious motivation. Progress required emotional honesty and practical adaptation balanced simultaneously. Time continued shaping renewed perspective and strengthened resilience. Slow adjustment became a testament to his perseverance and emotional maturity. The process affirmed that reintegration unfolds through empathy, stability, and consistent reassurance. His experience demonstrated complexity beyond simplistic resolution and confirmed the importance of patience during emotional rebuilding in social transition periods following extended disappearance. Alex's story continues beyond his physical return, revealing broader implications that extend into unresolved emotional and legal realities. The continued search for Melanie and David remains active, reinforcing that recovery does not conclude with located safety alone. Their absence from accountability maintains a layer of uncertainty that continues to influence Alex's emotional landscape and psychological balance. While physically free from concealment, Alex carries conflicted emotions toward the parent who shaped both his captivity and survival. Gratitude for independence remains interwoven with lingering confusion and emotional complexity that cannot be resolved through simple reconciliation or rejection. These internal contradictions illustrate how parental abduction produces deep psychological disruption that persists long after physical separation ends. Alex's experience demonstrates how identity can fracture under prolonged control and ideological influence applied during critical developmental years. The emotional aftermath remains complicated, shaped by loyalty, confusion, and awareness of years lost to enforced dependency. Despite regaining autonomy, his journey forward is influenced by unresolved reflection about who he was and who he becomes. This permanence of emotional impact reinforces the lasting effects of parental abduction and disrupted trust during developmentally formative periods. Authorities continue pursuing Melanie and David, recognizing the importance of accountability in addressing unresolved trauma and legal responsibility. Their absence keeps portions of Alex's experience unresolved and prevents complete emotional closure for those involved in recovery. The story extends beyond a recovered child and reveals the enduring consequences of psychological manipulation within close family structures. Alex remains caught between memory and transition, acknowledging both the trauma endured and the resilience developed through adversity. This complex emotional reality demonstrates how recovery involves process rather than singular resolution or simplified narrative conclusion. His case exemplifies how parental control can permanently alter perception, trust, and emotional security throughout adulthood and beyond. Even as stability returns, emotional reconciliation remains gradual, requiring continued reflection and careful adjustment over extended time. The unresolved presence of those who removed him continues shaping perception and narrative interpretation around his identity. Alex's story illustrates the lasting damage inflicted by displacement during critical developmental progression and emotional formation periods. It emphasizes that even when recovery occurs, emotional and psychological consequences remain part of lived reality. The broader implications of this experience extend into understanding how trauma influences growth and personal reconstruction. Through Alex's narrative, the significance of early intervention and protection from harmful parental influence becomes increasingly evident. His recovery process underscores that healing continues long after physical return has been secured. Emotional restoration demands sustained understanding rather than finality or narrative closure assumptions. This unresolved complexity marks his story as a lasting example of psychological disruption and resilience coexisting. The journey does not end with safety alone, but continues through internal evaluation and emotional reconciliation. Each reflection reinforces the consequences of parental abduction and its enduring impact upon identity and emotional stability. His experience reveals that regaining freedom does not erase psychological imprint left by years of enforced obedience and isolation. These emotional scars remain reminders of disrupted childhood and unresolved internal conflict.